friends. Welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name is Blaine Smith, and I am joined, as always, by my good friend and business partner, Brandon Young. And we are joined today with a special guest, Colonel George Dougherty, author of a book that came out about a month ago called Beast in the Machine. And we're going to talk all about this. George has a fascinating background, deep tech background within the area of defense and national service. And we're going to get into some of that. But importantly, I think we're going to spend some time talking about how his experience in that world has brought him back to the importance of human connection and caring, and how that relates to how we deal with some of these deep technological challenges and the way forward in life and leadership. So, George, first of all, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Blaine, and thanks, Brandon. I'm really excited. Thanks for having me on.
All right. All right. If you don't mind, I gave just kind of a quick overview there, but I've seen your bio and it is extensive and impressive, not the least of which a PhD from Cal-Berkeley,
No big
and
deal.
some serious experience in the United States Air Force, advising senior policymakers on big time matters of national security around technology. Could you give us a little more background of kind of who you are and where you're coming from, and then we can maybe get into our question for the day?
Oh yeah. I've got about 30 years as an officer in the Air Force and in the Air Force Reserve. So I've led organizations large and small. I think we have that in common, that military foundation. But I've
Mhm.
also, as you say, I have a PhD in engineering and spent some years doing research in national laboratories and academia. So I've got some familiarity with how things work in that domain. And also, partway through my military service, I got an MBA from Cornell when I entered the reserves. And since then, I've been having a parallel career where, as an executive in two different international management consulting firms, I helped lead organizations of various types, mostly tech companies and other that kind of science and technology driven organizations through periods of strategic change, which are always very stressful and very complicated times. So coming up in those three different professions, I received many different flavors of leadership training, but also did a lot of leading through various different kinds of times, different kinds of challenges with different kinds of, say, populations of folks to be led. You might think that scientists and military members might have very different ways of approaching things, but I find that as human beings, we really have a lot in common. And I can share an anecdote, which I think maybe is a great foundation for where I come from, which is my experience with field training, which has really kicked off my entire approach towards caring as a leader.
Hmm.
When I entered ROTC as a teenager, I was doing it like many folks do, primarily for the scholarship money, right?
There you go.
I wasn't necessarily that
Get it.
interested in making it a career at that point. In fact, I had some negative stereotypes about the military at the time. But and I was sure that I was just going to do my 4 years of required military service and then go off and live the rest of my life. But I was surprised when I was at field training, the boot camp for officer cadet trainees. There was a day that will always stay in my memory because we were running a race. I don't remember what the distance was. It was a short race, 5K or less, as flights. We were all each flight or platoon, if you will, had to
Mhm.
race against the others, and it was a contest to see which one would win. And I was not one of the fastest in my flight, but we did have some very fast runners in my flight. So as we all spread out along the course, I saw the first finishers from my flight cross the finish line, and all of the training officers and the black hats came rushing in from all sides, and they were not congratulating them. They were bawling them out because they called them on the carpet and said, you did not win. You have not won anything until every member of your flight is across the finish line. Look back down that track. Your flight is all spread out there. You've got folks bringing up the rear unsupported. You did not win until everyone is across this finish line because you never leave anyone behind. And
Hmm.
so they turned around, ran back down the track. I joined them, and we found the slowest members and cheered them on and encouraged them until everyone was across the finish line. But that day, when
Nice.
I heard, you never leave anyone behind, really was a turning point in my whole career. And I now looking back, I've been in the military in one sense or another for more than 30 years, and part of it's because of the change in perspective I saw on that day when I saw the
Yeah.
power of caring in some ways.
It's an interesting observation. I think it opens up the opportunity to really kind of dig in here through that illustration into a question that I think is on a lot of our minds right now as it relates to technology, the proliferation of AI, machine learning, all these other things that, we could throw a bunch of other buzzwords out there, but let's just say the proliferation of technology and the idea of human beings being left behind. To me, it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition there that I think is kind of on a lot of people's minds right now. So you're a guy who has, by all accounts, people would look at that and say, okay, wow, you've experienced a lot of, military, very structural paradigm, traditional structural paradigm, command all the way down to the bottom. You talked about tech, you talked about engineering. These are very structurally oriented elements, and then you inject all of this technology into it. I'd love for us to really get into how have you seen those elements of humanity um, either be left behind or be amplified, the need for them be amplified in environments where there is so much technology. And if I'm being honest, it sounds like a lot of fear related to that technology.
Yeah,
Oh
if
yeah.
I could just interject here, George, I want to hear your answer, but I failed to mention the subtitle of your book, which is How Robotics and AI Will Transform Warfare and the Future of Human Conflict. So we're seeing this play out across the globe right now in real time, and you've got the word human in the subtitle here. And so just as some color, I think what you're exploring in the book is fascinating and right at the front of people's minds right now. And yet, I think for us at least, we're super interested in Brandon's question, this kind of human element of it, if you don't mind giving us your thoughts there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I really approach the whole topic from a very humane perspective. I think when we're talking about application of robotics and AI to warfare or anything else, warfare is a very, very human activity. As I point out in the book, not even other animals practice something
Hmm.
like it in terms of our strange human habit of conducting organized violence against other groups in our own species. That's not something any computer or AI would naturally think of doing. It's a very peculiar human thing, but it's also, it's dark, but it's also very it is similar to love or any other human type of passion that would be equally hard to describe to a computer or have a computer or AI system understand. So I think that humane perspective is really important, not just for ethics, but also for understanding how robotics and AI will be applied, whether it's in the military, elsewhere, in a way that actually works with our society. Because if it doesn't, then just like any technology, it's going to get derailed or misused or just rejected. So, I think when it comes to the application to warfare, as you were just talking about, think about all the movies that we know where an AI or a robot is the antagonist, right? You got HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey. There's the nuclear weapons control computer from the old War Games movie with Matthew
Oh,
Broderick. Yeah, but of course, Skynet.
Joshua.
Yep, yep. There's so many, right? All the Terminator films have Skynet,
Oh
but
yeah.
but when you look at what makes them scary, it's not necessarily that that they're advanced AI or something. There are other examples of fictional computers or AIs that are actually very human and relatable, like in Star Trek and things like this. But all the malevolent ones, what's really scary about them is the sense that they lack all human benevolence, right? That they basically that we fear, at least, that if there was some superhuman AI or AI that was in a position of authority over us, that it would so lack in benevolence and human caring that it would treat us all like interchangeable numbers or just a cost benefit
mm,
equation. And you see this in all the discussions about super intelligence the heads of OpenAI and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have had these debates. The subtext is that it's almost assumed that an AI would lack all human caring and benevolence. And in a way, that coldness is what makes it so frightening. right?
Hmm.
What makes it so difficult to trust? So I think we'll talk about frameworks of trust here in a little bit, but I think that it not only is it important for what we do with AI and how we approach it as a society, but also it's interesting for what it says about human leadership. And maybe, if we look to avoid certain things in AI and future technology, maybe we should also be on the lookout for expressing some of those negative things ourselves.
Hmm. You just said that the human piece really struck me because I have found, and maybe you guys have too, that no matter how competent or capable a human leader I've had is, if they don't work to build trust, and I don't feel they're benevolent, to use your word, George, um, they're largely ineffective. And so there's certainly a place for capability, competence, kind of technical ability. I think we want any person who's leading us or any machine we're working with to have at least a baseline of that. But if we don't trust that they will use those capabilities justly or for our greater good, we can become very skeptical, if not completely mistrusting of them. And I think that's something we're seeing across the United States right now, but probably across the globe, is that we're ramping up the capability of all of these systems and tools and even our fellow humans. But we seem to be really lacking kind of a general trust in large institutions or people or organizations that have a lot of power. So I, I think AI and robotics plays a role in this, but it seems to be something that's kind of an undercurrent of our entire societal structure right now, even independent of technology.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a saying that I heard in at least in the military and in management consulting that was drilled into us, and many of those who were kind of coming from approaching their work from a position of expertise or technical competence, as you're talking about. And that is, remember that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's a great phrase. It's probably the one I return to more often than any other in my own leadership experiences, because as you say, all of those wonderful technical competencies oftentimes don't help a lot if no one will be willing to trust you as a leader, as a expert enough to apply those things because your motivations may be in question or something. I think one of the great things they talk about in the book is a really simple model of trust, which was originally applied to military teams. It was compiled by the Canadian Military Defense. They did a great big meta study a few years ago of all of the studies of what brings trust in military teams and other organizations.
Mm.
And they narrowed it down to, well, they basically condensed it down to four key pillars. And those are competence, which you talked about, predictability, which is associated with that, benevolence, and integrity. And the benevolence seems like it's a soft and squishy type of thing. But it's very, very hard, I think, for most of us to have trust in someone or something that we think does not care about us. Benevolence, as they defined it, is really the desire for the well-being of uh, the team member or the person being led, right? And so I think we need to have a genuine sense of as followers that our leader or our institution actually cares about us and our well-being. And if we believe that that's the case, I think we're willing to do a lot of following. There are folks who will follow leaders to the ends of the earth if they think that that leader really truly cares about them and is advancing their best interest.
Mm.
But if that trust is lost, if there's that sense that that leader either really doesn't care about them or perhaps only cares about themselves and their own advancement, you can do a lot of other great things in terms of competence and predictability and those other things. But yeah, it's hard to get that trust if there's not that sense of caring.
Yeah.
Brandon, softball here. You wanna talk about trust from our perspective? It feels like this maps over really nicely.
Well, it does. We talk a lot about trust being the foundation of leadership. We talk about the fact that when teams have trust, they can get a lot of things wrong, but still find a way to win. And conversely, when teams lack trust, they can do all the moves right and find a way to lose. And that it's got to be worked on. It's got to be built over time. We talk about uh, how trust has to be built, right? We don't just slap the table and say that we have trust. We just have trust. And that's just not the way it works, right? There's no shortcut to relationship. We talk about trust with our CARE model, CARE, candor, authenticity, reliability, and empathy. And I love how, you've brought up that axiom that a lot of us know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. What I think is really intriguing is that you mentioned that after we talked about just the general uh, lack of trust in society that we are experiencing right now, lack of trust and faith in institutions, and there's reasons why. It started at the turn of the century with like the Enron and the rolling blackouts and all that kind of stuff, and it built upon that in the crash in 2008, the housing crash in 2011. You've got 9/11, you've got voter fraud allegations, you've got large religious institution scandals. It's in the soup. It's in the cultural soup, as we say. What I have found intriguing about this conversation and listening to what you're saying here, George, is that, if people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and let's just stick with AI, for example, which is maybe a little bit more relatable for a lot of people who might be listening to this, who might not be war fighters, is if that is the case, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and AI has all knowledge at its fingertips. Why would people not be skeptical unless they felt like there was some kind of a caring, benevolent, as you have said, paradigm within that capability? And I think all we can do oftentimes is we look to leadership, right? We look to human beings, we look to our leaders. I mean, everything has a creator. There are people who have created these structures. And when we look at all of this, fracturing of faith and trust in large institutions, I don't know. I guess kind of what I'm taking from this is like, maybe we have all of these machinations of malevolent figures out there because we're holding up a bit of a dark mirror to ourselves, and we're not sure that we can even trust ourselves as the creators of these entities to operate in ways that will be pro-social or benevolent. That's kind of what I've been thinking about. You really got me thinking here.
Yeah, I think, well, when it comes to AI specifically, I think there are two important things that I think of when based upon what you just said. And one is we know where the AI is coming from, and the other is the illusion of agency, right? So
Mm,
AI is a product that's produced by companies, institutions, and so on, right?
yep.
And as a result of perhaps all the experience we've had over the past 15 or 20 years with the ever more explicit profit seeking of some of the big tech
Hmm.
companies, right? All of us have experienced the growth of ads. You can't watch a YouTube video now without seeing ever longer ads every 4 minutes, and so on. I think there's a sense that those, the large companies that are the same ones producing the very large foundational AI models are ever more looking to extract profit, let's say, from
It's
all
it.
of us as users. And so that gives you a dissonance that if these are the very companies that are producing AI, and their motivation appears to be um, you know, uh, economic, then does that demonstrate the benevolence that we would want to really trust the AI product? Having been through the experience of seeing how Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and everything else have gone from almost free user-centric tools to being heavily monetized. And so
Yeah.
are we just walking into that same situation again?
I think that's a good way of putting it, right? Like, I think many of us have engaged with things such as the social experiment, and one of the biggest lines that came out of that is that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product.
Mhm.
And there is an extractionary nature in that. Blaine and I talk oftentimes about the fact that, we don't partner with or work with organizations by which we feel it's an extractionary in nature. We did a lot of professional selling in our time, and we just don't believe that it has to be that way. We want things to be generative in nature. We want to have value accelerating relationships, and um, it's really intriguing to see how you could understand how some of these, like, fantasy or fantastical machinations start to get mapped over there, because in the end of the day, I'm not sure that I can trust the um, benevolence of those who are in charge of those models right now. I'm curious, how do you take this kind of soup, right? This like cultural soup, and kind of map it over into how this actually transforms the future of human conflict, as your subtitle says.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's so the latter part of the book really gets into that once we go through the more technological trends in the first part of the book. But one of the things we point out is that a lot of the trust, the issues of let's say the topic of morality in autonomous weapons as well as trust is often framed through the idea of human control.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's as far as the discussion goes, as in order to have a trustable, ethical robotic weapon system, it has to be controlled at all times by a human being. However, that assumes that the human being that's in charge of that system is themselves very ethical, which has turned out to not be a good assumption in a lot of cases. I think our U.S. military is almost the victim of its own success in the sense that we have so inculcated the rules of armed conflict and many other important ethical principles. You can't graduate from any U.S. military academy without taking a course in ethics. But that's not the case in most other militaries around the world, and it's certainly not the case in even folks who want to get a computer science degree. You can become an AI product developer without knowing anything about ethics. But
Hmm.
certainly some of our adversaries, like Russia, for instance, as they're conducting themselves in Ukraine, are explicitly not interested in reducing civilian casualties. In many ways, are actively targeting civilian targets because their whole philosophy of war is not this carefully scientifically designed and somewhat sanitized one that we pursue in the West, which is about very precisely striking targets to effectively defeat an enemy the way you might drop a tall building in a controlled implosion, creating minimum damage to anything else, but using science to determine the
Hmm.
precise points to strike it. Some other militaries and cultures rely much more on the sort of just bludgeon the enemy with a baseball bat until they give up, and that's been seen, for instance, in the way Russia has helped Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria and in Ukraine and in other places. The theory is you just make the civilian population suffer so much that they cry out to sue for peace and end the war, rather than trying to defeat the enemy in a clean military fight the way we might assume. But that really brings it back to the human element again. So in warfare, as in leadership, as in business, you really can't escape the human aspect because it is fundamentally a human activity. These aren't robots fighting each other over robotic issues. They're humans fighting each other over very human things using AI and robots as tools to try to get advantage. But ultimately, it's a human conflict. All these things are ultimately human aspirations and human struggles.
Yeah, George, if you just allow me to explore my own personal curiosity here, and Brandon and I both were pretty extensively involved in the global war on terror in theaters like Iraq and Afghanistan, in the conventional and the special operations side. And so we saw the very personal and human nature often of those conflicts in terms of entering rooms and detaining people and that kind of thing. I think we also experienced the use of new and innovative technologies throughout that process. Um, but and it's been a little while. It's been 10 or 15 years since we were actively engaged in those wars, which is crazy to say, but it's been a little while. But when I look at what's going on in the Ukraine theater right now, for example, and I see how rapidly some of these new technologies are being deployed to not just be a supplemental or complementary part of the fighting force, but in many cases are the primary weapon of choice. Drones being the obvious one, but I know there are others. Could you talk to us a little bit about the fundamental nature of how conflict is shifting right now under our feet? I mean, I hope that as the U.S. military, we are going to school on what we were seeing playing out on these other battlefields that we're not necessarily directly involved in, because it seems to me that if we are involved in a hot war or direct conflict anytime in the near future, it will look totally different than what Brandon and I were involved in only maybe a decade ago.
Yeah, well, I think that certainly the character of war is changing with the introduction of new technologies, but I think mustn't overestimate how much the nature of war changes. And when we do that, if we assume, for instance, that war is just a matter of destroying targets and closing kill chains, as we say, oftentimes that leads us to winning all of the battles, but losing the wars. And I think
Mhm.
we've seen that in some of the conflicts you were talking about, like in Afghanistan and in Iraq, where all of the actual kinetic, as we would say, battles where we were trying to destroy targets, destroy enemy vehicles. We did great as a military in all of those things, unmatched. Even without advanced robotics and AI, we had tremendous technological superiority over those opponents. But in many ways, we were much worse at the human aspects of war, right? I mean, the philosophy of victory that the Taliban pursued in Afghanistan was basically to win in the political and human domain and outlast the human um, uh, endurance or stick-to-itiveness of the U.S. military and the U.S. political leaders. And they ultimately prevailed in a way. I mean, we won all the battles, but ended up losing politically in a way, the hearts and minds, so to speak, of the population. Enough of them were with the Taliban that they ultimately prevailed. So I think that's another thing that I try to make a strong point about is that, if we assume that introducing AI and robotics is going to make warfare like Ender's Game or like a computerized game of chess or Go, that really is a disservice. We have to understand that warfare, like many other things, is going to remain messy. It's going to remain human. It's going to remain political, and that all the technologies that we put into the field in an attempt to win those conflicts has got to recognize that and have to be relevant within that real messy human landscape.
Yeah, I take your meaning as all of these emerging technologies are essentially tools, but whose hand is the tool in? And how is it being used? Is it used as a weapon in a malevolent sense? Is it used as a tool of war in a benevolent sense? I know I'm starting to, play with some really thin lines here, but I kind of take your meaning thus far as one of the decisive advantages of I would even say the United States military, knowing that our leaders must go through ethical training in the process, is that we are endeavoring to stay anchored in the messiness of war, which, as you have rightly pointed out, is a human endeavor. We are endeavoring to stay anchored to ethical practices, as opposed to there are actors out there that have no qualms in violating ethical standards. Let's just say standards of what would be considered universal morality standards, such as targeting defenseless civilians or human beings. Um, I kind of take what you're saying as the technology is a tool. Whose hand is it being used in, and how can we inject those critical elements of care as human beings who are operating from a posture of ethics to enable those technologies to be force multipliers as opposed to viewing them as the end all be all and this is going to change everything.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, most of us are not going to interact with robotic weapons, hopefully not, but a lot of us are going to be interacting with AI and other tools as they proliferate into our workplaces and our businesses and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the same principles really apply. And one that I think you were alluding to is the concept of agency and who really is holding the agency in a given situation. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of I make the point in the book that there is no such thing as a fully autonomous weapon. It's impossible because if it is fully autonomous, which means it is not taking any direction in any sense from a wielder, then it is not a weapon. It is simply a hazardous thing roaming around out of control. That the definition of a weapon is a tool that does the will of its wielder And if something cannot be wielded, then it is fundamentally not a weapon. And that goes back to the concept of agency. And a lot of the AI tools that we may be familiar with have a veneer of looking like a consciousness, right? Because it just makes it more easy to interact with. Chatbots and things will oftentimes refer to themselves as I, and they'll say, "Hi, hello, how can I help you today?" Things like this, right?
You did a great job, George.
Good to see you back, Blaine. What do you want to work on this morning?
Yep. Yeah, but that's just a veneer, right? Because in reality, the way those models are built, they're basically grown out of an algorithmic formula
Hmm.
that has to do with neural networks and deep learning training sets and all these things that I talk about a little bit. But the point is, we do not know how to build agency or benevolence or consciousness into anything right now. The only way that those things emerge is because they were evident in the training data upon which the model itself was trained. A lot of times that's human written literature, text, and so forth. That really is just an illusion,
Hmm.
that we do not have the ability to create agency, and therefore those elements of trust, such as benevolence or integrity. We can't program integrity. We can't program benevolence or any other aspect of agency or consciousness because we simply have no applied science of how those things are created in us or in anything else. So the the ability to create a tremendously large and powerful AI model that's been trained on the products of actual human cognition and human creativity does a great job of imitating human cognition and human creativity because that's the model that it was trained to emulate. But we can't design those things. And so until we can design agency and aspects of agency like benevolence, we really should avoid anything that smacks or gives the false impression of agency. So I really advocate for, instead of leading towards some uh, uh, all-powerful AGI or super intelligent type of model, which we are in no position to design, I introduced I think a much more hopeful one in the latter part of the book, which is really looking, instead of a Skynet type all-powerful AI as this thing we can be striving for a practical future. I like the model that's perhaps given to us by the military working dog and its relationship to humans. That's a model of a non-human intelligence that we have learned how to collaborate with in a really remarkable way, both certainly in military conflicts, but in other ways as well, where it's really a team whereby even though it's a non-human thing, right? There's a tremendous level of human trust that we have in our partner, the military working dog, even though it's an alien thing in a way. We go into in many different ways how that bond between the human trainer and the military working dog works. But it's been remarkable the level of real trust connection that exists between human warfighters, military working dogs, and we could emulate or try to learn from a lot of those basic principles when we talk about how we can make robots and AI team better with humans and have that result in a much more humanizing, humane, and ethical outcome than just relying upon giant AI models to follow their own opaque and brittle training and push the button and hope that whatever happens is something we can live with.
Wow. George, I love that metaphor. And having worked with some soft multi-purpose canines in my career, I can tell you that it is a spectacular thing to see this other uh, entity outside of the human, but working closely with humans, and the capability there is amazing. I had never really thought about it that way until you mentioned it in the book, and I think that's a phenomenal metaphor. Um, I feel like I could do this all day. I mean, we're about out of time here. This is fascinating stuff, and I think the thing that I want to make sure that people do is they go get your book because everybody wants to know more about this, and uh, I want everyone to pick up Beast in the Machine. I love the subtitle, How Robotics and AI Will Transform Warfare and the Future of Human Conflict. And George, while you have had a long and really impactful career to this point, in many ways, it feels like it's all been build up to the moment we're in right now. So I hope you've got another 20 or 30 years of working
Yeah.
life ahead of you, because I feel like the table has been set for people like you to take it and run with so many of these lessons we've learned. And there's just so much of this that is so important for all of us going forward. And I'm glad you're one of the good guys. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
No, I'm really enjoyed the discussion, and I'm glad that you are doing what you're doing too. Your care model and so on really provides people the tools to, as leaders, to not be that, that AI, that uncaring power in charge of our own office, our own company, our own military unit, whatever it is that we would dread to be, right? Uh, I think being a human leader is going to be even more important because as we become more surrounded and spend more of our time dealing with AIs and other things that cannot manifest those human qualities, it's going to make our desire for real human leadership even more important. That hunger will become even more intense, and the things that you're teaching and the practices that you're enabling, I think, are only going to become more valuable and and more differentiating, if you will, in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, George. Appreciate that. George, where can people find Beast in the Machine?
Well, it's available pretty much everywhere online that books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, so on. It's also available in the UK and Canada, pretty much all English-speaking countries. It's coming out in some foreign language editions now. But if you prefer audiobooks, there's also an outstanding audiobook. I can say that because I was not the narrator. The publisher has a really remarkable narrator, Darren Elliker, who did just a spectacular job, and so it gets rave reviews. So if you're more of an audiobook person, definitely look for the audiobook as well. It's available on Audible, and all the other places where you can find audiobooks.
Very cool.
Right. Well, we'll be sure to spread the message far and wide. Thanks again, George, for joining us. And thanks everybody who's listening in. If you find this conversation interesting, if you have questions of your own, send them to us. We read all the messages. We love addressing your questions here on the podcast. So send us a note to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com, and we'll be sure to do our best to get those questions on the show. Also, if you found this conversation interesting, share it with your friends. Start a conversation of your own. I think that's really important as we wrestle
Yeah.
with these difficult and complex topics. Let's have as much meaningful conversation around it as we can. And with that, we'll say goodbye for now,
Yeah.
and we'll
And
see you next
and
time.
and hook a brother up. Buy George's book.
Yeah,
I'm
come
doing
on
it
now.
right now. Hook a brother up. All right. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next Applied Leadership Podcast.
All right.